Hello, my name is Elaina Serotte. I'm a certified divorce financial analyst, and I have with me today Elaine Fraser, a very experienced family law attorney in Burlingame. Hi, Elaine.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. When someone comes into your office for a consultation, what are some of the top concerns that they express to you?
So the first thing that I often see is someone with a lot of anxiety because the anticipatory questions sometimes are more difficult than the answers. So they're coming to me for information. And one of the first things that I hear, or one of many, is will I be able to keep or have sole physical custody of our children?
Mm.
And that's a very big emotional question for people. And of course, there are lots of factors to consider in my answer. You know, are you working? Is the other party working? What's the history of the way you are parenting together? And even if you're not working, you might be working down the road. Do you have special needs children? What is the educational component and volunteer work that's been done? Are there substance abuse issues? So we have a conversation so that I can better understand the person's particular situation and then give more pointed advice. But important to remember, in California, there is great support for frequent and continuing contact with both parents. Research shows us that that's in the best interest of the children. So I make sure that they understand this underlying principle.
Fantastic. Thank you for that information. That's definitely a very emotional issue. Some
Sure.
of the other emotional issues are often around the home. Is that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So often, one of the first questions is, can I keep the house? Because people are emotionally attached to their home, and perhaps they haven't considered the three main umbrellas of discussion to answer that question, can I keep the house? Because the three components would be the legal component, the financial component, and the emotional component. And I think the emotional component is why most people come in with that question. They're attached to it, they've helped decorate or renovate. They've raised their children there. They have memories there. And so that is the first focus for a lot of people. We also need to talk about what are the legal implications of keeping the house. And there are quite a few. Can you afford the mortgage, the property tax, and insurance? Can you, have you considered the capital gains or tax aspects of keeping the house and then selling it down the road? Because the rules are different if you sell it during the divorce as opposed to, let's say, 10 years. And so we like to interface with either a financial planner or an accountant, but certainly the general rules are something that I always share with them so they can understand the financial component. And the legal component ties in with the financial component because it's not only emotionally driven, but it's dollars driven. I mean, this is real life. This is, they need to understand what their cash flow is going to be with. So oftentimes I will suggest you should talk to a certified financial divorce analyst to run some scenarios. Sometimes the answer is very clear. Yes, I can. There's a lot of money. Or more often, no, I can't. Because I'm not going to be able to afford what the whole family could afford now with income that's divided.
Interesting. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience has been around when people have to make a choice about how they get divorced? They've made the first tough choice that they would like to get a divorce. Now, how?
Sure. I think that the most important question for a person to answer for him or herself is, do I want a divorce? But the next question, if they're in my office, they're certainly contemplating that first question. But the next question, which most people don't have the information about, is how do I do this? And it's important for them to understand process options in California. All of us have watched TV and movies, and we know the default of getting a divorce, which is court litigation, whether it's a trial or lots of hearings. And I call that the default because that's where you end up if you and your spouse don't agree to something different than that.
Mhm.
And what's available in California is very exciting. We call it alternative dispute resolution processes. And there are mainly two. One, mediation, is when the parties hire a neutral, trained family law attorney in mediation to help you navigate the process, gather the information, talk about the yardstick of the law, and then talk about possible ways of resolving this piece. Sometimes people will have on their own a consulting attorney who is more aligned with their concerns to help them understand what they're getting into, what a court might do, how can I negotiate, so we strategize and brainstorm before the next mediation session. And ultimately, the agreement, if you're successful in mediation, would be reviewed with your consulting attorney. Very different role than a litigation attorney who's much more involved, much more.
Mhm.
And then the other alternative process option is known as collaborative divorce or collaborative process. And that's when the parties make a commitment never to go to court, but to share all information so that everyone is on the same page in terms of understanding what they need to talk about. Because there are three buckets. There's the kid bucket we talked about a little bit. There's the stuff bucket, which is all your assets, all your debts. And then there's what we call bucket number 3, allocation of income bucket, also known as support. So in a collaborative divorce, you build a team. Each party has a collaboratively trained attorney. And that's a uppercase C, capitalized, not a lowercase c, because there's a lot of training involved. They each have a divorce coach to help them learn how to communicate through this process. Ultimately, that will be a reward down the road if you have children and need to co-parent.
Mhm.
And they will also help with a parenting plan if you have children. That will ultimately be part of the agreement. They'll also be at these joint meetings to help you manage emotions, because collaborative is probably the only one that really allows for emotions to come into play. So the idea is the agreement at the end is the agreement of the parties, not thrust on them. And so it is more enduring of an agreement, and it maintains the integrity of the family. I wanted to share with you one other question that I am often asked.
Please.
And they kind of, there's a couple of subparts. A person will come in to me and say, I don't know anything about our finances. It just wasn't my role. And I had other roles, but I don't know. I'm really scared. So I explained to them, first of all, in family law, there are no secrets when it comes to learning, or what we call discovery of information. And depending what option you're in, there are different ways of getting it. But all that information will be available to that spouse. And then the next layer of that is, okay, now I have all this stuff. I don't understand it. What does it mean? How do you divide assets? How do you get valuations? And there are ways of doing that I've been doing for a very long time. And sometimes that means bringing in other experts, like an expertise in, for example, valuing a retirement.
Maybe a business valuation.
If there's a family business.
Yeah, if there's a family business.
The question is, what's the value of a family business? And that is a topic of itself in a way, because people think, I am the business, there is no value. And the reality is there's an education process to explain why the family law courts don't agree with that analysis. So there are evaluations or valuations done of the family business. And then there's the spouse who says, I haven't worked during a marriage outside of the home, and I have no retirement. And that really scares me. So we talk about that. So first of all, if you've been married for a certain amount of time during the marriage, the community, which is you and your spouse, may build some retirement from the spouse who was working. And that is community property, which is subject to sharing or dividing, as we say. And then the other thing that they need to know is if the marriage is over 10 years, there are possibilities of having derivative benefits through Social Security at the time of retirement. Again, more explanation for that, but most people don't realize that. And they feel damaged, or that they a lost opportunity, if you will. And there are ways to make sure that that lost opportunity can be recouped.
Great. That's great.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of fear, it sounds like, when people come in to see you.
Indeed, a lot of fear.
Is there, sorry, go ahead.
Please.
If, how do you help people wrap their head around the allocation of income between now what will be 2 households versus 1?
Yeah, and that's tough because we talked about the fact that you can't spread dollars around in 2 households the same way you shared in 1 household. And so there are a lot of factors that are dependent on analyzing and talking about sharing or allocation of income. How much does everybody earn? If there are children, how much time does each parent spend with the children? What are the needs of the spouses? There are factors under the family law code when you look at more longer term or post-judgment support that the courts will consider. The age of the parties, marital standard of living. How did you guys live? Did you go on fancy vacations, or you couldn't? And didn't? And so we kind of look at the totality of the circumstances. There are guidelines for child support that the state legislature mandates through a very involved algorithm that none of us understand. And so we have wonderful software that the courts use, and those of us who practice in this field have the same program. That helps us. And then we kind of look at spousal support as more, there's 2 phases. There's temporary, and then there's the post-judgment we talked about, and they're analyzed very differently. And then there's the question of, if we have a spouse who's not been working, does that person need to go back to work or not? And that, really depends. It's very case dependent and involves an analysis of education background, learning experience, how much the other spouse is earning, because one spouse is earning high income and the other spouse could earn, but not very much. And maybe childcare costs would eat away further, erode the value of the other spouse working. On the other hand, if the spouse has the marketability to work, the ability and opportunity, then that is going to be of interest to the spouse who's already working to lighten that allocation load. Yeah.
So Elaine, you and I are both part of the collaborative practice San Mateo County group.
Yeah.
And one of the most amazing things, and you've been working on this for many years, is our public service, which is a 3-hour presentation done by a panel, a family law attorney like yourself, a CDFA like me, and then also a coach that you mentioned before in the collaborative process. It's a great education for those people, and I know you've actively sent your new clients there. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I think it has some first of all, it talks about the options in more detail than I did. And then it goes into some of the more substantive issues, including emotion, which the coach will talk about, and some of the financial implications and legal implications. I encourage both spouses to go, because then they have the basic foundation of they start out kind of the same information. And then they would consult with collaboratively trained attorneys. But this workshop is, the feedback is so wonderful because it's all done on a volunteer basis. All the presenters do this. again, like you said, it's a public service. It's a nonprofit organization. And the goal of this program is to educate the public that you have choices. How empowering is that to walk out and say, oh my God, I can do this a different way. I thought we were going to have to do it this way.
Mhm.
And, we also talk about the realities of court, which sometimes is the only option.
Mhm.
So in this workshop, we talk about where are the courts today and where have they been the last few years in terms of budget cuts? How long will it take for a case to go through the court system? Is it shorter in mediation or collaborative divorce? So we talk about all these important yet nuanced issues that clearly is on the mind of people who walk into my office. So the feedback is wonderful, and we've been doing it now a good 12 years, but it certainly has grown in the number of people learning about it and thus attending it.
Thank you very much for your time.
That's my pleasure. Thank you.